Welcome to In Session by Westside Children's Therapy, the podcast about the real work of pediatric therapy and the tools that help kids find their voice. Whether you're a parent, caregiver, therapist, this is the space where real conversations happen. Each week we sit in session with experts in the field to talk about the work, the wins, the challenges, and the science behind helping kids meet their full potential. I'm your host, Marika Kackett, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. We're in session. Welcome to this episode of In Session, Big Feelings, the teen and tween episode. 1 in 5 adolescents struggle with anxiety, depression, and big emotions. And there's a lot of talk about that, but are we really helping? This episode, we're talking with the experts to give you and yours plenty of advice on how to deal with those big emotions in the teen and tween era. So welcome, Kevin and Joyce from Westside Children's Therapy.
Thank you.
So we in a previous episode, we talked about counseling for littles. How does a counseling session look for a preteen, tween, teenager?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of times there's a lot of mirrored similarities between littles and our tweens and teens. There still usually is going to be some level of incorporation of play-based interventions. Kids definitely enjoy playing games. It helps kind of disarm some of those defenses. Some of our older adolescents may feel more comfortable just engaging in more traditional talk-based therapy, but the door is always open to engage in that because the gameplay can be a great equalizer, as I mentioned, to help lower those defenses and just help them engage and recognize that, like, we acknowledge counseling's kind of a weird social convention. Our clients share a lot about themselves. We share very little about ourselves. But through the use of play-based interventions and art-based interventions and just meeting the client where they're at, that helps disarm those defenses and really form that therapeutic relationship.
How does therapy look different from a 12-year-old than to a 17-year-old?
Great question. I think, what you think about initially is kind of like that developmental stage, where that child is coming from or where that adolescent is coming from. So a 12-year-old is aware of their surroundings. They've come out of that stage where the world revolves around me. But they're also in at that point of trying to discover, like, okay, then who am I? And learning is social. So I'm looking to my peers and I'm deciding, do I measure up to and do I match, what I'm seeing in the classroom? And where a 17-year-old is starting to, maybe individuate a little bit more, and they're kind of coming into their own, and they've moved past that stage of I'm trying to discover who I am, and they're sort of moving into that almost early adult phase. And so with a 12-year-old, you might, as Kevin said, engage in some gameplay still. You might give them some, art supplies and have them work with that. A 17-year-old is probably going to be able to do a more traditional kind of talk therapy situation.
What are some of the emotional and mental health challenges that you see particularly in this age group?
I would say a lot of anxiety, especially as it pertains to academic performance, especially with our middle schoolers and high schoolers. They are given the message that they need to prepare for college and that they need to be obtaining certain academic achievements to get into the best college possible. So see a lot of anxiety surrounding that. And I think the other big area is, as Joyce mentioned, they learn through their social world. So there's a lot of social types of anxiety and issues, a lot of comparisons. How do I stack up against this peer compared to this peer? Trying to fit in. And then that role identification of who am I as a person is being shaped by these peer groups. That can create a lot of inner turmoil. And then we also see things like our depression, our ADHD, and really we see some of those transitional issues, especially when we see someone going from elementary school to middle school, and then from middle school or a traditional junior high setup into high school. Those are really big transitions for our tweens and adolescents that can really kind of dysregulate them.
And for, I guess, your adolescents, your teens, do you find a lot that are very skeptical or, I don't know about therapy? How do you get them to really open up and at the end of the day trust you, because this is all based on the foundation of trust?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, really for any client, but I think you're right. In particular with adolescents, it's a big, trust is a big thing. And so knowing how to engage with an adolescent so that you kind of demonstrate to them, look, I'm going where you're coming from, and that's where we're going to start. And nope, you don't know me. And being able as the therapist to acknowledge, yeah, I'm a brand new person. Why should you open up to me? And especially I think with adolescent males, it can be very difficult because they're not socialized typically to talk about feelings. And so you get an adolescent, young man and it's sort of like, I want you to open up and tell me all your feelings. And they're sort of like, dude, like, no, that's not what this is about. So you engage them in what their interests are. And almost in the way that you do play therapy with a child, you utilize their strengths, their interests, maybe their sport to kind of like find your way in and figure out, how can I relate to this person? Even if I don't understand it, maybe they can teach me. And then that kind of empowers them, and it treats them as though they're, an emerging, adolescent, or they're growing, into adulthood. And it models for them, we can have a good conversation. You can teach me things as much as I can teach you.
And I think that's a good point, because a parent's probably thinking, how do I get my kid to just engage with me other than saying, how was your day? It was fine. What'd you do today? Learn. How can you get, especially young boys, to actually articulate in a session? Like, what are some of the tools that you use that would be helpful for a parent at home?
Yeah. Again, I think the big thing, the take home that we kind of mentioned, is really meeting that child where they're at. One of the challenges sometimes I give my adolescents, especially the males, is to ask their parent how their day was. See how the parent responds. This is a good opportunity for the parents to really model how to respond to that question. Because when a child goes to school, they go to their traditional 8 periods of coursework. Maybe they have an extracurricular after school and they go home. They just view that as like, oh, it was just a regular day. Nothing exciting happened. Even though they probably had a test, they might have gotten to a disagreement with a peer or significant other. That's stuff that they feel, well, my parent doesn't really care about that. So one of the things that we work on is helping parents, one, understand that it was just a day. We can ask, well, what happened in your day? We can elicit further questions, but also recognize, like, sometimes when kids first get home, the last thing they want to do is talk about their day in school. So let's give them some time. I let all my clients know when I ask them, like, how was your day or what's going on? And they just go, I'm okay. I will ask them a follow-up question such as, what does good or okay look like for you? Because it's going to look different for you than it looks different for me. And I encourage parents to do the same thing, but also to model that, which is why I encourage my adolescents to ask your parents how their day was. Show a genuine interest in what mom and or dad or grandparents or aunts, uncles, whoever the caregiver is, what was their day like? And parents can model that, because kids just assume people don't want to hear about their day because they went to school and that's their quote unquote 9 to 5.
So, and the kind of one thing that's, when you're talking about this, is in the back of my mind is the sort of nebulous thing is just social media, right? And how it affects me as an adult, and I can only imagine teens and tweens. I mean, we could do a whole episode on social media, but what kind of, I guess, how is the prevalence of social media affecting kids' mental health, positive or negative?
Yeah, I don't want to be a negative Nancy here, but I think look, technology has its place, and there certainly are really good uses for it. I think when it comes to adolescents and social media in particular, again, you have these kids at a very kind of critical age. Adolescents are thinking so much about, who am I? What do I look like compared to everyone around me? How do I fit in? Am I accepted? Am I liked? It's all so kind of based on becoming who they will be. And so if you're seeing these, snapshots on social media of somebody's, perfect life, or they have all these things and they're doing all this stuff, and they're supposed to be kind of that bar that's set for what you should have or be or do in adolescence, I think that can be very misleading for young people. And I think that I like that suggestion of kind of, when you get home, take yourself out of your own head. People aren't looking at you as much as you think they are. I've just been through this with my own daughter, who's coming out of adolescence, and just thinking about, let me step out of my own head for a little bit to get some balance and get some perspective. And I think parents can be really helpful with that. In terms of my thing was, I always joke with whether it's clients or my own kids, oh, my day was great. Thanks for asking. I went to the grocery store, I went to work, and just kind of, playfully with them. It doesn't have to be so serious, but the way we model our own conversations in the home and the way we model our conversations with our own friends and sharing information, about our days or about how we feel about something can be really important so that kids have another example of how to communicate and how to kind of, manage and handle those feelings that they have.
Well, I think, it makes me think about when you're saying this, especially with young women, if their mom always says, I'm ugly, I don't like the way I look, I look fat in this, well, then I can see where if they're seeing something, a curated image on social media, how you really need to get out of your head and go, my kid is listening. And I think the same thing with boys where, I can't show emotion. I've got to be this tough guy. So, then how do you handle, working through FOMO, which is like a big thing now. I mean, FOMO, because you see these very curated lives on social media. How are you able to work through things like FOMO and bullying in therapy sessions?
The kids come up with all of these acronyms, and so I get a kick out of like just trying to learn that from them. But I think this is where we need the involvement of the parents, and we need their support, and we need them to know that like you are still a critical piece of this kind of interaction and this resolving whatever's going on for the kiddos or the young people. And, the idea of grounding yourself in some way to reality and what's actually going on. During the pandemic, they talked a lot about get out in nature, because you need that kind of movement through nature to really bring yourself kind of back to reality. It was a very surreal experience. And so I think, kids that are involved in sports and activities where they're getting themselves outside have a better balance of maybe, that experience of, okay, I'm not really missing out, and having frank conversations with your kids about, look, this is just a snapshot. And there are people on social media who will show the reality of their life. And I may show you a 30-second clip of what I'm doing or where I'm shopping or what I'm involved in. But the reality is it looks pretty messy otherwise. And just, I think having conversations with your kid, keeping that line of communication open, being willing to, kind of push a little bit to get in with your child and talk about things that they're going to resist, and that's normal. That's their job as a teenager. But to continue to show up and be there and be available for them.
Yeah. And I think to Joyce's point, the conversations I try to have with my adolescents, especially when they're getting older, is to be a well-informed consumer. To Joyce's point, a lot of times what we're seeing on social media is very curated. It's been filtered, it's been cleaned, it's been edited.
The filters.
Yes.
It is not usually an accurate portrayal or depiction. Not to mention, nothing stops somebody from withholding posting photos from a vacation that happened 6 months ago and then posting it today, acting like they were just on the beach somewhere. So just that encouragement to be a well-informed consumer, to recognize that. And then to Joyce's point, that idea that a lot of stuff was happening behind the scenes before that very curated post was made.
Yeah. And, when we talk about like social media and this idea of identity, whether it's your gender identity, your sexual identity, your cultural identity, how prevalent are those themes in adolescent therapy?
I think very much so. I think the generation of young people that we see now, they're very open. They're very accepting and honest about, especially gender identity. They're very savvy about things going on in the world. And so, when in my generation, which is a few years ago, you didn't talk about it. It was not acceptable. It was made fun of. It was awful. And now I think, kids are comfortable with their identity and kind of, using those labels or just, being accepting of other people in their world that are identifying as, other than cisgender male or female. Yeah. And I think that's healthy for them.
I would say they're really breaking down the stigma and taboos around certain topics with their comfort and openness that they've been able to utilize social media for. So I think to unvilify all of social media is that it does serve as a platform for them to connect with other like-minded peers and individuals to really normalize and validate their experiences. So I think there is some positive that can come out of appropriate, healthy use of social media, because again, they are knocking down barriers. Again, coming from a generation that didn't grow up with social media, and much to Joyce's point, there was a lot of don't talk about this or that, like that's private. Where now there's a level of comfort again to really break down some of these walls and barriers.
And I think it comes down to a healthy
balance.
Yeah.
It's all about the balance. So talking about those of us who, on this couch and in this conversation who also did not grow up with social media and who grew up with parents that were not as open about things, where does the parent come to play in these conversations, in these sessions where you obviously need the parental support, but you have to maintain this confidentiality? So kind of walk me through how that thought process works.
So a lot of times what we do is we let that adolescent or tween kind of be the driver of some of it. So we encourage, or I encourage, check-in and check-outs, but I make sure that the child is on board with that check-in and check-out. I really make a point of emphasis to explain what confidentiality is versus what it isn't. To both parent and child. So parent understands that I can give high-level overviews of like therapeutic interventions and perhaps some therapeutic homework, but the details, the specificity of what we talked about in the session often isn't going to be shared, but that can come from the client or their child. And again, the use of parent support or caregiver support sessions. My adolescents know that I'm going to schedule a caregiver support session with your caregivers. Is there things that you would like or not like to be shared? So we really want them to know, and I think this helps build that trust that we were talking about earlier, that we are here for them and that our goal is to support and advocate for them, as well as let the parents know we do value your insight into what's going on with your child. That'll help us incorporate some different things into treatment. And then we can also provide some support and guidance to the parents based on what we're observing and then what we're hearing from both parent and their child.
So, how do you help a parent who is like, I have a teen, I don't know what FOMO is, I don't know what all these social media, like all this stuff going on. How can you help a parent who really just doesn't know where to start, even really how to talk to their tween, teen, adolescent?
That I love that question. And I was given this advice as a new parent myself. Even with littles, when you have them come in with these really unique interests, they're oh my gosh, they're fascinated with, ships or dinosaurs or certain video games. And like, you have no clue what they're talking about. Somebody told me once, listen to their heart. And that's what I think we do when we're working with someone new. We don't know them. So we're going to go where they're coming from. And we're going to say, one of the first things I ask, what do you like to do? What interests you? What's your thing? And then I just listen to your child. They can teach you so much, for one. But I think too, just, making sure they know that you're there, especially with teenagers. You may go, how was your day? Fine. How was school? Fine. And that's all you're going to get. But if you stop asking, they're going to think you're not there anymore. But if you continue to ask day after day after day, every morning, good morning, I would say to my children, and I'd get a grunt because they're not morning people. But I keep saying it and I keep asking. And when I get that good morning, then I'm like, yay! And I make such a big deal out of it and they're embarrassed. But, they know that you're there. I think that adolescents, as much as they may kind of push the adults away or their caregivers, they do need to know that you're there. They do need to know that you're invested in them, that you are available. And so our job as parents isn't necessarily to feel good about ourselves, have great self-esteem from these kids. It really is more knowing that it's our job to show up for them and that it's okay not to know. And maybe you do a little Google search at night and type in FOMO and figure out what you're missing out on. I'm sure there's things that you can look at on YouTube and other places to find out these acronyms that are, the skibbity toilets and all that kind of stuff.
I was going to say, we are actively trying to keep up on
Yes,
the lingo
always.
and slang. So fret not, we are also actively Googling a lot of times what is being said or the different acronyms that are being used, because I think of one of my adolescents in particular, he uses a set of acronyms and abbreviations that are similar to ones I use, but are totally different meanings.
They don't mean what you
oh
think
my
they do.
goodness, thank you, Google.
Love it, yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, what you're talking about is creating a safe space.
Absolutely.
And so the need to create a safe space, or one that a child, adolescent, there is room. There's room to have conversations before it gets to an apex, right? So before you get to a crisis. What are some of the, and I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, especially with littles, they like dinosaurs. Let's talk about dinosaurs. So for teens and tweens, what are some things that, some sort of skills that you can help a parent who just wants their kid to open up, just even have a conversation other than say, I'm fine, it was great. So what are some things that parents can do just to have those conversations and reinforce that safe space with their kids?
I think as Joyce mentioned, the big thing, keep showing up. Keep showing up, keep asking the questions. I know I used to do that to my mom as well. What did you eat today? Food. What are you watching TV? What are they doing? Stuff. I would do that. But every once in a while, I would tell my mom exactly, and then she'd get really excited. And I was just like, oh, okay. But then I'd go right back to being an angsty teenager. So keep showing up. Keep asking the questions. Meet your child where they're at. Parents usually are pretty aware of what their kids' hobbies and interests are. Incorporate that into the conversation. Even if you're not particularly interested, that's okay. If kids want to talk about video games or sports or art or YouTube, that's okay. One of the biggest reminders I gave some of my parents that I've been working with lately is they don't understand why their child watches a YouTuber play video games. And I have asked them, do they watch, it's football season, so go Bears. Are they watching the Bears play? And the parents will say, yeah, I love watching sports. And I go, well, technically, couldn't you play football or baseball or soccer or any of the above sports? And they go, well, yeah, but not to that level. And I go, your child is watching this YouTuber, this gamer, play the game at a level that is beyond their skill. It is just like us watching our beloved Bears on Sunday. That is how your child is. They're interested in video games and maybe not football. So they're watching this gamer or YouTuber stream playing a game much like we would watch Sunday football.
I never thought of it like that. It's almost like, well, sure, I can do a stick figure, but I'm not Picasso.
Right.
That is so cool. So, kind of on the same line of thinking, parents, what they don't know. And they've heard, they've heard things like CBT, DBT, talk therapy, these crazy acronyms, and they're maybe confused about, what types of therapy are out there. Can you kind of demystify some of those, what those mean, and like mom speak it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I'm like, well, don't you know? so CBT, I mean, that's one of our acronyms. That's our world. And so I think too, though, to kind of, connect what you were saying, Kevin, to the idea of what is CBT, what is DBT, that's what we do. Part of our job as a therapist is, we may not be disclosing what was said in the session, but what we're going to do is we're going to ask the parent some questions about their relationship with their adolescent or their tween. And then we're going to share with them, okay, well, what we do in session is cognitive behavioral therapy. What is that? Well, I can tell you what that is. And that's taking the thoughts of your child and then looking at, if this happens, I have this feeling that comes up. And then as a result, I might have this impulsive behavior or a reaction. And what our goal is to get them to make some space in between this happening and my reaction so that they can think about it and make a good, kind of conscious choice about it, so it results in fewer consequences and more outcomes. And so we'll explain that process to them. We'll talk to them about the different emotions that are typical for a child their age. When you were talking about littles in the earlier segment, all feelings and emotions are okay. We look at the family dynamics and say, well, is that true? Because there are often written and unwritten rules in a family. And so is it okay to show anger in this family? And if so, what are the appropriate ways? How has your child been demonstrating when they're feeling angry? Well, how do you and dad show when you're angry? What is the child growing up seeing?
What are they modeling?
What are they modeling, right? The dad from A Christmas Story, is that what they're seeing? And so why do you think they're swearing or pounding doors or, stomping feet? And so we talk to parents about that. And I feel like one of the roles that I think, we take on pretty seriously is, especially at Westside, I love this analogy of we just kind of wrap around the entire family. And that means the kiddo that we're seeing, the parent, and any other caregiver that might be, involved in the family, to kind of support them and to say, what is it that you think you need? What would you like? And we do, really emphasize the need and the importance of parent support so that parents don't feel like they're out there alone. I give them, different resources to check out. We make special time aside from the meeting with the child so that we can just talk as adults about, what maybe they might need. Maybe mom or dad need to spend some time in counseling and just process out the things that they've been going through. A lot of our kiddos have some pretty high level needs. And when you're parenting a child, that's a full-time job. When you are parenting a child with ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, sensory processing issues, that adds all these other layers. And that is so real for parents. And they feel it and they're carrying it. And it's really, really hard sometimes.
How do you then, and I think this is a question that we've gotten a lot too, support the siblings of children with that have a lot of different modalities that they're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many books out there. The normal one, different books about that child who's maybe neurotypical and they've got the sibling with high needs. That's a lot of constant parenting and maintenance and treatments and things like that. And so, from the social work perspective, which is my background, we look at kind of like this whole system, and we're looking at our client as sort of the center of that. But then we're assessing each of the relationships that child has with everyone in the family. I do often, kind of check in with parents because sometimes they're bringing the sibling with. I always greet the sibling as well, get their name, so they, I know who they are. And sometimes it comes to the point where we just sort of naturally talk about the sibling and identify that, hey, maybe they would just need some supportive counseling for a little bit, just to process, that, yeah, my little brother Joey is a lot of work and it really stresses me out to see this. Some kiddos are very dysregulated and it's really disruptive to the sibling, or they're getting a lot of attention from the parent and, the other one is the responsible one, and that carries a lot too. And so you can identify that maybe it would be good for them, we can refer them to one of our other therapists just for some supportive counseling for a little bit.
I mean, I think it takes a village,
Absolutely.
One of the things, it's not like when you have a medicine that kits a virus and kills the virus and you automatically feel better. We always talk about outcomes and we measure everything in outcomes, but outcomes isn't linear. So what are some things that for teens and tweens especially, that are outcomes? I think, Kevin, you mentioned every once in a while you'd say, actually, I did have a good day, Mom. And she would say, oh my gosh, that's great. But then you go back to being, an adolescent. So, but that's still a positive outcome. So talk to me a little more about these outcomes. Like what are some things that parents can gauge?
Yeah. And I think sometimes what I remind parents is look for those little wins. A lot of times we're looking for these big changes Well, changes happen often in baby steps and incrementally. So look for these little changes. Look for those wins where you asked your child how their day was and they shared. Provide praise and then model that back to them as you talk about your day, for example. We're looking again at the reduction of frequency, intensity, and duration of what the presenting issue or symptoms may be. And that, again, is going to be little wins. So I often remind parents, catch them when they're good. Catch them when they're good. Let them know, reinforce those behaviors. I think a lot of times we come from the lens of we need to correct the negative behaviors immediately. We can have sometimes even better outcomes when we catch them when they're good and highlight like, hey, you did a great job handling this, especially if we have maybe a more high need sibling or conflicting sibling relationship. Like, hey, you did a great job not throwing the toy at your brother, or when your brother hit you, instead of yelling at them or screaming or throwing things, you just took a few deep breaths and you walked away. I think those are sometimes the bigger things. And I remind parents, you see your child every day. So sometimes it can be hard to notice some of these changes. And I think that's where we as counselors sometimes come in, and I don't want to say like save the day, but we can highlight like, hey, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, grandma, caregiver, whomever, you're saying that you're still seeing these problems, but they're still getting mad. Yes, but they went from punching holes in a wall to breaking pencils. I'll take a broken pencil over a hole in the wall. So I think sometimes it's just reminding parents that growth and change is happening just in these increments.
And I think that's when we really kind of wrap our support and services around that parent, because it is a hard thing to do. An acorn doesn't turn into a tree overnight. This is all a process. And that's what, one of the things I like to remind parents is this is a process, but we're going to look at those wins. It can also, and acknowledge that it can also be very difficult to turn because you see brother being nice to his sibling when he was just tearing apart the toy room. However, especially kids with ADHD need 10 times more praise than they do criticism. And they need, to hear something positive so many more times because their symptoms are socially unacceptable behaviors. And so they're going to hear about those every time. They may not hear every time, thank you so much for picking that up. I was working with a kiddo the other day, and I must have said 5 or 6 different things that they were doing that was really helpful. And I felt like I was being almost artificial, and I have to remind myself, but I don't know how often this child hears this. Right. So I want to make sure I acknowledge every positive behavior because it is so important for them to hear. And it's equally important for parents to feel that support and validation from us that, yes, this is going to be hard, but it will pay you dividends in the end.
And I think that, again, goes back to community and, having a safe space. And one positive thing about social media that we've talked about is normalizing these conversations and helping to normalize therapy. So what are some, what's one thing that you wish every teen, tween, and parent knew about therapy other than it's great?
It's not hokey. It's not a, unimportant thing. It is a space because, unlike Gen Z and the boomer era, we do need to talk about feelings. And it's okay to talk about those feelings. It doesn't make us weak. In fact, emotional intelligence combined with, other kinds of, what else? Emotional intelligence and, wise mind. It leads us to wise mind. It makes good decisions. It makes us more effective in our jobs, in our sports, in our relationships. And so there is so much that goes into working with someone over time, and they're going to carry that with them down the road. I always look at therapy as a journey. And so whether you started as a child and you pick it up again in adolescence and then maybe pick it up again in young adulthood, that doesn't mean it didn't work. It means that you're using it the way you're supposed to use it, which is to process when it's too heavy for you to do alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, we're really here to help shoulder and carry the load. That's one of our roles. And I think that really ties into what Joyce was mentioning in the end there, that it is a journey. It's a process. my clients and parents will hear me say progress, not perfection, to really focus on that, like, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for areas of growth. We're going to do that with strength-based approaches. That sometimes we become one of the biggest advocates and even cheerleaders to our clients, where we will give them additional praise when they're cleaning up and putting things back. But we're also going to create an environment where we would like for them to clean up the game and put it away. And then we will provide that praise. So we do different things to just try to create an element to provide that support that both client and parent are looking for.
Yeah. And, at the end of the day, it comes down to support. It comes down to creating that safe space. So what are some tools that are out there, whether it's websites, is it journaling, is it art, that you feel, especially for that teen and tween age, that is really helpful in supporting their mental health journey? Because it is a journey.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think, so I was negative Nancy early about social media. I'm going to be positive now, but I think that for young people, there's so much more available in terms of positive messaging about your person, your health, your mind, your, your personal rights now than there ever were. And I think of clients that I worked with early in my career that didn't have access to certain support groups, topics on things that they were going through, because they were so far away and there wasn't this social media presence. And so now what teens do have access to is, topics and discussions and good information about things that, weren't previously available to them, because they can find it on social media or through a reliable internet search. I often tell, share with young people, like, how to search for something reliable and good information, and how to kind of be curious and a little skeptical until you get some validation maybe from other sources that this is a good place to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think the positive advent of social media, that connection that it brings, it allows kids to form different peer support groups and things of that nature. And I think the biggest thing I remind parents is listen to understand.
Yes.
Your child has a lot going on, as do you. They often feel like they're not heard, or that what they're dealing with might not be as important, whether through direct or indirect messaging. So really just, listen to understand where your child is at and where they're coming from. I think that pays dividends in the end.
I think if everyone would listen to understand, we would be a much happier society.
In so many ways. And I cannot think of a better way to end it. Listen to understand. All feelings are real. All feelings are accepted. And I have FOMO for the next session. So we will see you next time. This was In Session with Westside Children's Therapy.